All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Somerset County Office of Youth Services December Community Connections Workshop. The topic today is school phobia. We are joined by Ira Hays, a licensed clinical social worker who currently serves as the Director of Program Development for GenPsych, New Jersey, Maryland, and Florida, and as the Clinical Director of GenPsych Anxiety Centers. He has worked throughout the continuum of care from inpatient, partial, residential, and school-based, and he owns his own practice and is an adjunct at Monmouth University. In the webinar, we will discuss treatment for all three and then discuss on how to successfully assess and treat school phobia. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I will be recording this webinar, so we will have it posted to the county YouTube webpage. And it should be available by next week for those who are looking to share the content here today with anybody who hasn't attended or is looking to have this resource. Everyone who is attending today and is present for the full hour will also receive a certificate of attendance and any resources that are available that were presented, like the slideshow, and the slides will be available. There will also be a brief survey that will pop up for you at the end of the meeting. So when you close out of your Zoom, we just ask that you complete the survey for us so that we can have some feedback on the presentation. In addition to that, I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for any questions that could be answered during or after the presentation. I will also be providing Ira's information in the chat as well so that you can follow up with him if you want to get in direct contact. So Ira, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen. I just want to say a big thank you to Henry, because I think, this is a great opportunity for me to talk to a lot of people. Thanks to Henry setting this up. I think it was like a month or so ago that I kind of hit a couple of the kayak meetings and ASAP meetings and was saying that I was willing to talk to kind of anyone who would listen, kind of poked fun at myself, saying that even the people behind me at the ShopRite grocery store we're getting an earful about school phobia. So I really appreciate this and the working with Somerset County, because I actually present quite a bit. I'm actually presented to a county in Maryland where we have an office with GenPsych just earlier this week, and I had about 15 people show up, and I was like thrilled to talk to 15 people. So being thrilled to talk to 15 people and kind of connect with just those people. I was like, if one person gets help from each of these people, I would be thrilled. So to have like 160 something people on this right now is just amazing. I'm trying to share Henry and it's saying that I can't. So you might just have to enable that for me. Oh, there we go. All right, perfect. So Henry kind of already talked through this first screen, but just my name is Ira Hays. I am the Director of Program Development and the Clinical Director of the GenPsych Anxiety Centers. We are partial care and IOP throughout the state of New Jersey. We also have offices in Maryland and Florida. We just opened our Marlboro Anxiety Center. That's why we're doing a lot of these webinars on school phobia. The Anxiety Center in Marlboro and the Anxiety Center in Rochelle Park are specializing in treating OCD in adolescents and adults, as well as school phobia in adolescents. We're really excited to be talking about this because I think it's something that I'm very passionate about. As Henry had mentioned, I have worked throughout the continuum of care. I think it's really helpful for me in terms of presenting this topic. Because although I've been back at GenPsych now, I was there about 13 years ago, just came back about a year ago. But I have worked on inpatient, residential, you name it, in-home. I was school-based. Prior to coming back to GenPsych, I was school-based. So I know there's probably a lot of school clinicians and SACs on here, school counselors. So I was school-based for about 6 or 7 years. I was a clinical coordinator at an out-of-district placement. And I was lucky enough to start working with kids who were school avoidant and school phobic about 7 years ago, building some special programming for them, trying to get them back to school. So a lot of what you're going to hear today is stuff based on, best evidence-based practice and a lot of years of experience. In fact, I just posted something on my LinkedIn account, and it was basically a little pad with like a couple of books, a couple more books, and then like 20 books. And one of them was kind of like evidence, your theory-based learning. You're learning from practice, and then you're learning from mistakes. So I'm happy to say I've made a lot of mistakes. I've tried and learned from each and every single one of them. And hopefully I will help you guys avoid any of the mistakes that I made through this presentation. If you need me at any point, you can give me a call. My number's here on the screen. It's 973-580-9432. You got my emails there. The best contact for me is usually my GenPsych email. I check it about 650 times a day. So you could always get a hold of me there. I will let you know that I'm relatively new to webinars. I do a lot of presentations in person and then on Zoom. So the webinar format's a little bit new to me. So I tend to ask a lot of questions and interact a lot. So if I am asking questions, feel free to answer in the chat. That might be helpful, or I'll try to answer some of my own questions based on answers that I've gotten just recently. So without further ado, we'll get started. Just so that you know, I know Henry had mentioned it, but he's going to monitor the chat for the questions and stuff, but I will also, the training will go probably less than an hour because I'm well caffeinated and we'll talk very quickly. But I will hang around as long as needed to make sure that everybody's questions are answered. I have a Christmas party at 5, but I doubt we'll go that long considering it's an hour. If you have that many questions, we'll just set up another Zoom and I'll meet with you. All right. So, what is school phobia? So a lot of times when we meet with families, they're going to do what I did. When I first started learning about school phobia, I Googled it. Most of our families are going to Google it. And if you Google it, at least at the time that I made this slide, it said school refusal is a term used to describe the signs of anxiety a school-age child has in his or her refusal to go to school. It is called school avoidance or school phobia. So my contention and the main premise that we're going to be talking about today is that I believe that school phobia, school avoidance, and school refusal are 3 completely separate things. The outcome of not going to school is the same, but the etiology and often the treatment is going to look a little bit different. So we'll talk about each one of these things, how I kind of diagnose these things, and then what to do once we find out the proper diagnosis, how to treat it. So the goals of this training, at the end of the training, hopefully understand a little bit more about school avoidance, school refusal, and school phobia. You feel confident in your identifying school phobia in your students or clients. You'll feel more comfortable in your role in working with students or clients that present with school phobia. And you'll understand how GenPsych can be a partner with you guys, again, with our anxiety centers and all of our PHP and IOP programming, getting the same training as you. They'll be a great partner for you guys in treating school phobia. So I've been doing presentations on with adolescents probably for about 7 or 8 years now, and I have never done a presentation without mentioning this one slide. It's in every single one of my trauma-informed care trainings, my OCD trainings, my school phobia trainings, but I can't tell you how much. I usually ask the room if they've ever heard of Dr. Ross Green. If you haven't heard of Ross Green and Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, and you work with children and adolescents, I would definitely suggest checking him out, maybe YouTubing him. He's got a lot of free content online. But the essential premise of his content is a child does well if they want versus a child does well if they can. So I think if you were to walk away from the main thing in the beginning of this webinar would be just this one slide. So often we kind of take the approach of a child does well if they want. And if we take the approach of a child does well if they want, our main interventions are often limited. So we're limited to just motivating our student or client to do better. And oftentimes we do this inadvertently. We don't mean to do this, but we kind of limit our intervention. So I'll give you a couple examples. If Tommy shows up tomorrow for school, we'll allow him to do A, B, or C. Maybe we'll allow him to pick a prize. Maybe if it's an older kid, maybe we'll allow him to spend time on TV afterwards. Maybe we'll buy them an Xbox if they make it a whole week to school. But what I want to just kind of give everybody a little word of caution that a child does well if they want doesn't actually solve any problems other than the problem of motivation. And oftentimes, at least about probably 90 to 95% of the kids that I work with, motivation isn't the problem. So what we inadvertently do is we ask people to increase their motivation. So let's say it's a Tuesday and we tell Bobby, hey, if you come to school Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we'll buy you an Xbox on Saturday. And Bobby's capable of white knuckling through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He gets to school for 3 days, but his anxiety level at those 3 days is near panic. And his limbic response is evident the entire time. And we as the helpers in his life feel really happy and thrilled that he made it 3 days of school. However, We bought him, we think we do a great job. We bought him this reinforcer. He did a great job. We did a great job. We reinforced it. And then Monday morning, he can't come to school. So what often happens is we don't realize that if a child's anxiety level doesn't drop and he attends school for 3 days, even one day, and the anxiety level doesn't drop, and they're forced to be in that limbic response for 5, 6, 7 hours, multiple days in a row, it actually reinforces the opposite. It says, this is a scary place, don't come back. And many times we'll lose kids that way, in the sense that they'll have those 3 or 4 days of really good performance, and then we don't see them again because we haven't addressed, in an appropriate way, that limbic response. Dr. Ross Green gives us the opposite. He says a child does well if they can. And I think this is really important to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about school phobia. A child does well if they can kind of asks us to put on this detective hat and start to kind of hunt out the reasons why this kid isn't coming to school. Because the majority of kids, even kids that don't excel academically, will go to school and probably enjoy school. So they might build their ego upon being a good athlete or a good friend or a good Yu-Gi-Oh card player, or whatever it is that they're into. They meet some need by coming and attending school. So many, many, many kids will go to school regardless of academic abilities, and they'll go to school because it meets their needs. So when a child doesn't go to school, we really need to put on our detective hat and start really looking at the reasons why. And it's only then, when we start figuring out why, that we can kind of help them come to a solution. So as we were talking about before, I think the differential diagnosis is extremely important, because although avoidance and refusal ends with the child not coming to school, the treatment does look a little bit different. And I think oftentimes the etiology is a little bit different, but more importantly, the treatment looks a little bit different. So we want to rule both of these out before we even address the idea of school phobia. So the first one is avoidance, and this is one that I had to learn over time. So the idea of attachment rather than school phobia. So we're going to ask questions. Oftentimes, we're going to give you questions on these slides about some of the questions you might want to ask. And I'll give Henry the slides. I think I sent it to him. He'll be able to send out everything to you guys. But who do you go out with? So again, if a student is only going out with their attached person, a parent, a sibling, grandparent, anybody that they're going out with in their life that they're attached to, any of their caretakers. Do you ever go out without that person? That's a really important question. So are they able to attend sports practices and camps? Are they able to separate and go and do things without this attached person? The reason I find this one tricky is oftentimes when I was school-based, I would have a family section. I'd have the kid come in, the parents would come in, we'd have this fantastic meeting with some administrators and counselors and teachers, parents and kid. And we'd talk and everyone would be motivated, and the child would leave with plans to come the next day. And everyone around the table would be like, we're feeling really positive about this because this kid looked great in the meeting. He seemed calm, he wasn't panicked, he seemed to be okay. The next day, one of the counselors was out next to the car trying to talk the kid in as they were crying hysterically when asked to come out of the car. And what we quickly found was there was a huge difference between a phobic response to school and a phobic response to leaving an attachment. So we want to definitely rule out attachment and look towards treating the attachment concern if that is the primary thing that's going on. So again, we're going to ask some of these questions to rule that out. The other part of avoidance that we really want to take a look at is agoraphobia. So pre-pandemic, we did see a lot of adolescents with agoraphobia, but I have to say in the last year or two, that number of children has multiplied probably times 5 or 10 or maybe even 20. We keep seeing a lot of kids that haven't left their house since pre-COVID very much, or that they were isolated significantly during COVID and they have never really returned to their full functioning. And for those of you who aren't familiar with agoraphobia, it's basically the fear of leaving the house. I tend to think of it as the fear of going to places, as I often see a lot of kids who are school phobic become agoraphobic over time. So let's say their panic attacks start at school, but then they have, like, this is the perfect time of the year where a kid goes to the mall and it's very high stress situation, especially in this area. It's a high stress situation and they start having panic attacks at the mall, then at the grocery stores, then at practices, then, before we know it, they're kind of nervous about leaving the house because they're fearful about panicking. So to come to the idea of whether they are agoraphobic or school phobic, we're going to ask them, when was the last time they left their house? And a lot of these kids, if they are agoraphobic, they may or may not have left the house for months. Just because they have left the house doesn't necessarily mean they're not agoraphobic. So they may still have a limbic response to leaving the house, an anxious response, heart rate goes up. And they may still have that response, but they're able to kind of function through on smaller tasks. So let's say mom or dad says, hey, do you want a Slurpee at 7-Eleven? They're able to kind of function through 30 or 45 seconds to run into the store. They still have that response, but then they go to 7-Eleven, they get their snack, they come home, and then they isolate. And maybe they do that once or twice a week. But that still could be an agoraphobic kid that's able to leave their house under certain, minor criteria. So we want to ask how many times they left their house in the last 2 months. Does leaving the house cause significant anxiety? So if that's really the idea of whether they're agoraphobic or not, whether they actually have an increase in that anxiety. And then of course, have you had panic attacks outside of the home and where? So if they've had panic attacks multiple places and they're isolating from those places, if they're not agoraphobic yet, they're on their way to becoming agoraphobic as their panic increases. So a lot of times the treatment for agoraphobia is going to look very similar to treatment for school phobia. However, we're going to talk about building a fear hierarchy in a little bit. And if we take an agoraphobic kid and we ask them to make the first rung on the ladder of their fear hierarchy coming to school, we'll probably likely not have a lot of success. So in treating agoraphobia, we're going to start some of the exposures at the home with either the family, the kid, if they have an in-home therapist, or even through the magic of Zoom now, we're able to do some of that. But again, agoraphobia is going to look a lot like what we talk about in a little bit. The treatment will look a little bit similar. It's just the treatment will start at the home. So once we've ruled that out, we got a couple other things that we want to talk about ruling out in terms of avoidance. We want to definitely discuss medical with students. Some of the toughest clients I've worked with had medical concerns, whether they're having abdominal cramping, irritable bowel syndrome, tension, headaches. We often want to take a look at this as a possibility of why they're staying home. But again, oftentimes I'll have the child go to their medical professionals, rule out the main things that are going on. Obviously, it's our due diligence to make sure that that happens, to make sure that we're not dealing with a 16-year-old with, anxiety related to their thyroid or anxiety related to allergic reactions to certain foods. So we want to definitely rule that out and then provide a lot of education related to the exposures and how we're doing it. I always put addiction in here or substance use because I think it's really important that we address that as the possibility. Most people, I think, when they're looking at substance use, especially in adolescents and young adults, we kind of rule out the idea that this is an anxious response, that it could be school phobia. So for example, a kid who's waking up and smoking marijuana, using marijuana before school, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then the primary concern for the parent is we can't send them to school, they just used, or the school doesn't want them there because they just used. We see that as a substance use issue, but I just want to caution everyone, to remind everyone that oftentimes, especially more recently, we see substances being used as a way to treat the primary cause of anxiety, which is potentially school phobia. So we don't want to just say if someone has substance use issues that we're ruling out school phobia as the cause because we know that it is substance use. I think it's a very intricate combination of those two things. Obviously, I'm not saying that we don't treat the substance use. We obviously have to get that under control so that we can do some of the anxiety work. It's really hard to do. One of the things that we ask children to do in OCD work and school phobia work is refrain from using substances while they're in treatment with us. We also kind of want to rule out school refusal. So we've kind of addressed school avoidance and how we might do that. Again, some of the things like agoraphobia, the treatment is going to be very similar. We could talk about that. But with school refusal, it's a completely different story. I will tell you, I don't think I mentioned it, but while I was working in the school systems, I was also consulting with our school districts, helping them do programming. And I would say that like 80–90% of the people that would send a child to me that was school refusal turned out was likely not school refusal, that it was something else going on listed on one of these rule outs here, or school-based anxiety that we'll talk about. But before we can kind of identify something as school refusal, we obviously have to rule out concerns related to testing intelligence. When I was working in a school at one point, I was working with a young lady who was struggling and came to a specialized program that we created to help retain students in that school. And one of the teachers said to me, a biology teacher had said to me, that student's so lovely and she's so smart. I can't believe, she just doesn't want to do the work. And, as a counselor there, I was, trying to put on my advocate mode. And I was like, unfortunately, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this student has an IQ in the mid 70s and a processing speed of like 67, 68. So she's probably having a hard time, understanding the multi-steps in biology. And we had come to that conclusion, had them tested after they worked with us for a little while. We had them retested because they were having a hard time just playing a board game. So that's kind of just a quick tip. My kind of like poor man's version of checking for processing speed is kind of playing a somewhat complex board game with my students or clients and then finding out whether or not they can keep up. And oftentimes if they can't keep up and it's not due to some kind of distractibility, we'll have some testing done. But we always want to make sure that they're capable of doing what we're asking them to do. We want to rule out learning disabilities, obviously, as before calling something school refusal. So I'll give you another example. I was working not too long ago, about a year or two ago, with a client who was coming into school at like 10:30, 11 o'clock every day. They missed the first couple of periods. And they were pretty good at getting in late, but they late nonetheless. And it was an attendance issue. They were about to lose credit for several classes in the morning. They were sleeping in and struggling in the morning to get to school. And it kind of came on my radar as a school refusal problem. But lo and behold, we kind of talked through, did some assessment and discussion. And it turns out that this person was coming to first period, and first period had a do now that was to write just about a paragraph, free write about a paragraph about our day, what they learned the day before. And then the teacher looked at that free writing. It also turns out that this student was dysgraphic and struggled immensely with that and had significant anxiety around writing and having that writing looked at by the teacher, being able to produce work because of this dysgraphia. So obviously that wasn't a situation where it was school refusal. Once we were able to address the learning disability, the student was able to kind of participate. We were able to set up kind of a little bit of a fear hierarchy for that person just to manage the little bit of anxiety still about writing. But we were able to do that. And again, that was something that was kind of labeled coming to me as school refusal, but a good example of it wasn't school refusal, it was probably their learning disability causing a barrier. We also want to evaluate for secondary gain. And when I say secondary gain, this is probably one of the more misunderstood things that I'm talking about. It's pretty rare that I see this, but every once in a while I get a student, they're younger teenager, 13, 14, 15 years old, and they have either a parent or grandparent at home that's sick. Whether or not they're terminally ill, maybe they don't know, maybe we don't know, maybe the parents don't even know. But in the eye of the child, they're trying to spend time with this sick parent or loved one. And those are the kind of things that we kind of categorize as secondary gain. They're staying home, not necessarily because they want to stay home, but they're staying home because they're either fearful of leaving the sick person or because they want to gain as much time as possible with that sick person. So it takes a lot more work. But again, I wouldn't necessarily call that school refusal. They're not refusing school. They're staying home, not because they're refusing to come, but because they're trying to get that gained time with a family member or loved one. So I'd definitely evaluate that before we call it school refusal. And then kind of the last couple of things that I'd like to draw some special attention to and some consideration to are some things that had me tricked early on. Aggression is a big one. So typically speaking, I have worked with as an in-home. I would go out to homes from school-based, and I would see a lot of aggression from kids early in the morning. So a parent walks in, kind of kicks the bed, hey, it's time to get up, and they're, F you, leave me alone, I'm not going. So verbal aggression. And then when the parent even pushes further, they're actually escalating, getting physically aggressive. And 9 times out of 10, when someone becomes aggressive and it gets to me on my desk and someone's asking me, what do we do about this aggressive school refusal kid? They're just oppositional. It's labeled as school refusal. But I think it's really important to remind everyone that it is fight or flight. The limbic response has several responses, one of which is fight. And when I'm kind of talking to parents and trying to get them on board with understanding this, I often talk about, I give them a little, I share a little scenario. So typically we're in a meeting room of some sort. You could all imagine while you're at home right now, if you're in a room, imagine you look at a closed door, and on the other side of that door, I'm in the room with you, and on the other side of that closed door, there's a bear. And I'm trying to convince you that, hey, it's going to be okay. The bear is kind of trained. We've seen it before. It's not that big of a deal. We'll be fine to get out to our car. We're just going to walk out to our car past this bear. Everyone in that room is going to respond a little bit differently. Most of you guys are helpers and pretty good at articulating your feelings and thoughts. So you might try to go very logical, like, hey, Ira, I'm not sure about that. It's not really my thing. You know what? Maybe I'll confront the bear tomorrow when I'm feeling a little bit better, but today's probably not a good idea for me. Some of you will shut down, you put your head down, you kind of just try to ignore the situation, hoping that other people in the room go out first and test the scenario out a little bit. Others of you will cry. You'll get so upset and worked up that will be hysterical, crying, I'm afraid of bears, I'm not doing this. And then some of you will probably be aggressive. And the harder I push you to go out and walk past the bear to our, the next room or the car, you'll probably get aggressive with me. You might even hit me or scream at me. But this is the same way that our kids respond to anxiety. So when we're asking them to participate in something and they're anxious, they respond in multiple different ways. And one of those ways is aggression. So I bring that to light only because so many times it gets mislabeled as school refusal. And this aggressive, angry looking child is really anxious. It's really a phobic response to what's being asked of them. And in their response, it's aggression. So I want you to think, if you've ever had a panic attack, right? If you're panicking and someone comes up to you and, tries to help you or tries to talk to you about something unrelated to your panic, we can be pretty short and pretty aggressive too. And many of us on this Zoom are probably trained professionals with a lot of training on how to manage our anxiety. And the final thing that I want to talk about is kind of the rule out is video games. So very often people respond to the idea that video games, that becomes the contributing problem, that they're up all night playing video games, and that's why they can't come to school. So I kind of also want to throw a word of caution out there to take a look at that behavior. There are kids that, their egos aren't built at school and they built it on an online forum like video games, and that is something that they feel like they're really good at. However, there are some kids that their anxiety may start, and we'll talk a little bit about when anxiety starts, but their anxiety might start at like 8 p.m. the day before. So maybe they're starting to slow down. They finished all their things for the day. They're kind of going through the Rolodex of the day for the following day, and they begin to get anxious. And these kids, they start to panic. They might be in their room at night or downstairs, wherever. They start to panic, and they're trying to look for a constant distraction technique. And many of us, if they picked the DBT skill at that time, we'd be thrilled, right? If they were using, self-soothe with the 5 senses, we'd be thrilled. But they've already learned that one of the ultimate distraction techniques, is video games. They can't eat when they're playing video games. They can't communicate. They can't get upset. They're just totally taken over by this video game, and all anxieties and thoughts about that Rolodex of things bothering them is distracted from. They're no longer involved, and they're playing video games. So typically the progression goes, they get anxious, they start playing video games, they play till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. When they're so tired, they have no other choice but to fall asleep. So they fall asleep, then someone goes to wake them up at 6 o'clock in the morning and says, hey, what's going on? It's time to go to school. And they're like, oh, I can't. And then the parents, the family, even us as therapists, we say, it's all because of these video games. And it's all because of these video games, and the video games have to stop. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't stop the video games. What I'm saying is that is oftentimes a response to the anxiety related to school phobia, or some other anxiety where they're trying to self-soothe with video games. So I just put that in here as a rule out for refusal, so that we don't just automatically see video game playing and think, well, they just like video games more than like school, so it must be school refusal. Oftentimes, when I dig a little deeper, we find some anxiety, we find some use of video games to self-soothe, not only in school phobia, but in all other anxieties. Just checking the chat here. So I just want to, now that we've kind of, if you have someone with school refusal, let me go back real quick. Am I able to go back here? So if you have someone with school refusal, I don't want to leave you hanging. I do recommend working with a family. I was trained in KPMT about 10 years ago. I love KPMT. It's Kasdan Parent Management Training. It's really a clever way that Alan Kasdan up at Yale has kind of used operant conditioning, I think, kind of like reorganized it and operationalized it into his own theory. It's fantastic. I've used it for a long time and it's been great. So I would look into finding a KPMT therapist or getting trained on KPMT therapy yourself. I believe that I am not a trainer. I'm just, I do KPMT, but I'm not a trainer. I think Dr. Zabaka over at Monmouth University is a KPMT trainer. If you guys are ever looking for a training in that, she's fantastic. If you need her info, please feel free to email me or message me and I'll get you that info. It's a great, it's probably one of the top 5 things that I'm thrilled that I learned in my life, because it gives me a way to address families and parents with children who are oppositional, who are not responding to some of the traditional therapies that we might try. In terms of school phobia, now we've gotten through school avoidance and school refusal. We're going to spend the rest of the time now talking about school phobia. Hopefully I'm not talking too quick, but again, I'll be on at the end to answer any of the questions. Let's see, I think I might have a question here. Oh, we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about the role of social media and screens in a little bit. When we're talking about school phobia, one of these things has to be present. So an uncontrollable, irrational, and lasting fear of certain objects, situations, or activities, right? So we have to initiate the fear response, this limbic response. We have to have the panic attacks, the shutting down, the fighting, or the running. So one of these things pretty much has to be present for the diagnosis of school phobia. Now, I have been tricked before, and it took me a while to figure this out, but early on in my career, I would talk with a couple kids, especially in that like 12, 13, 14-year-old age, and I would be asking them questions about their anxiety, and they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'd say, you know, when your heart starts racing and you start sweating, going through all the physical symptoms, and they'd be like, I don't experience any of that. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was confused because everything else seemed to be right in place with anxiety. And I was really, and there was no other, you know, explanation to what was going on. There wasn't a significant amount of depression. There wasn't a lot of other stuff going on. But what I did find was that there was a kind of a pattern in behavior with certain kids, and especially in that age group with a significant amount of trauma, multiple ACEs, where they would shut down. And when I say shut down, they oftentimes had a history. So I first saw it when I was working in residential with kids with a significant trauma history, but they were in residential for like that fight response or that run response. They would run away from the home, or they'd be fighting with other kids or staff. And what they did was they learned that the consequence of fighting and running was too high for them. You know, everything in their lives was being disrupted by this. So what they did was they almost had like a shut off switch. That the moment our continuum of anxiety goes 1 to 100 or 1 to 10, right? If it's 1 to 10, when we get to like 8, 9, and 10, we're in panic mode. But they get to 8, 9, or 10 and they're in fight or run mode. So they would never allow themselves to get to 8, 9, or 10. They had learned over time to shut off at like 3. So when they got 1, 2, 3, when things became just a little bit uncomfortable, boom, they shut down. They literally would just shut down or potentially even dissociate. So I want to just caution you that if you're working with a kid that isn't showing any signs of anxiety, you may want to explore this a little bit as an option to explain why you're not seeing that anxiety, because it's kind of interesting it's an interesting phenomenon that I caught on to, especially in the residential programming. But again, this is what we're looking at, that panic attack, shutting down, the fighting, and the running. So once we've kind of identified that we're looking at school phobia, again, the assessment is really kind of important when we're talking about the correct interventions. So I tend to lump people into two or three categories. We have the kids that are school phobic that are in performance anxiety, the kids that are school phobic that have a social anxiety, and then the kids, I put other, but generally speaking, I'm just saying that they have both. And they can be difficult at times, but they sometimes require the same treatment, just in both axes, both performance and social anxiety. So what does the performance anxiety look like, and how do we get there? When I talk about a performance anxious kid, we're talking about the kids that are really nervous about the performance aspects of school. So we're going to ask them, when does the anxiety begin? And when do you think the anxiety begins? For most people, that's one of the questions I usually ask, try and get a little receptive. But for most kids with performance anxiety, it's right at the time that the stimulus occurs, like right when someone's asked to perform. So this kid is the one that, like, as soon as you say, hey, it's time to get on the bus or it's time to get out of the car, their anxiety spikes to like a 10, to 9 or 10. Their anxiety is very, very correlated with the request to perform. So you don't have as much free-floating anxiety about the performance anxious kid. They're not the ones typically, and again, this is just typical. There's always some outliers, but they're not the ones necessarily panicking at 7, 8 o'clock at night. They're the ones that are panicking right when we ask them to perform. And this can be a little bit confusing as well, because I've met with several kids who have the intention, that meeting that you have, if it's not an attachment issue, but sometimes we have kids that are highly motivated to attend school, right? They get up in the morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock, they're anxious, but they get dressed, they get showered, they brush their teeth, they pack their bag, they're ready to go. And then the second, 2 minutes before the bus comes, when somebody says it's time to go, they have a total meltdown and they're unable to attend school, right? And what's trickiest about this presentation, the parents, clinicians, school, everybody that works with these kids, is what happens next. So when do we feel relief from that anxiety and how long does it last? Well, the performance anxious kid typically feels relief as soon as we remove the performance, the need to perform. So let's say that bus drives by, they didn't go outside, and the bus pulls away, and the parents say, forget it, you're not going today, we'll try again tomorrow, right? That limbic response is gone. The breathing starts to regulate. 10 or 15 minutes later, this kid is no longer anxious, right? And sometimes they're so tired from the anxious and limbic response that they're exhausted. They might go from being so high in anxiety to so low and just falling asleep, right? And so many parents have come to me and said, my child is so manipulative, right? And we may, as professionals, we might even said, like, my child is so manipulative. My child is so manipulative. The anxiety was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I swore they were anxious, but then 10 minutes later, they're able to just fall asleep. So how anxious could they have been? So that's where our role as advocates and case managers and educators really pays off, because we're able to explain to them exactly that this is normal for anxiety. This is what happens. That heightened limbic response followed by a crash and like some, a reduction in anxiety that's almost immediate, that adrenaline and stuff is metabolized very quickly, and that anxiety is pretty low. So I think that's important for us to recognize that is the potential of someone who is having performance anxiety in the morning, that they can have that really high and then come down and then relax. They might even have the rest of the day until they're asked to perform again, might be totally normal for them. I will say that there is a subset of kids with performance anxiety that will tend to, like, towards the end of the school day, tend to increase anxiety again, like, oh, I should have gone, because of the performance of just being judged about going to school. My teachers are going to wonder where I was. I'm going to be a little bit further behind on my schoolwork, and that becomes a stressful event. What do you like most about school? These kids are not going to be the kids that struggle as much with like gym and the cafeteria or the bus ride. What are your favorite classes? Which do you feel least anxious in? We're really trying to get a feel of what is their day like and where do they become most anxious. And I typically joke around about this because I am a social worker, and when I was in school, I avoided math like the plague. Like many of you in the helping field, we became helpers because calculus just seemed too overwhelming. But interestingly enough, when you're talking about the performance anxious kid, many of them, if you ask them, it's assuming that all testing, intelligence, and everything is on point for where they should be. If you ask them about English or math, many of the performance-based kids are going to like math a little bit better. They're going to find that a little less anxiety-provoking. And the reason that I found why is because if you ask a kid, at whatever age, what's 4 plus 4? They know it's 8, right? A couple of you guys who are social workers too, just check me out to make sure I'm right on that. But it's usually 8. So they have this concrete answer. They can double check themselves. They can say, okay, 8 it is. I can rest easy now. But if you ask that same performance anxious kid, what's your favorite color, right? They're going to be preoccupied in their head. They're going to be like, what is my favorite color? Oh, my favorite color is red. But what if I tell them it's red and they think it's because I'm angry, when really red is my favorite color because I love people and I love Valentine's Day? they're going to perseverate and perseverate and perseverate what is their teacher's opinion or their classmate's opinion on what they just said. So a lot of times you'll see in like IEPs, like the using multiple choice questions as something on their IEP. And many people think just because multiple choice is easier, that's why it's on there. But the reality of it is it also helps with a lot of performance anxiety. If we can ease someone in with some multiple choice questions, and they can double check that work, that's even better, because then they can know, okay, I was right. And they're not being judged necessarily on, their particular thought about it. It can help a kid ease into academic stressors. And then doing homework is another huge indicator. How am I doing on time? Okay. Doing homework is another huge indicator. If a kid is taking a significant amount of time, again, assuming all intellectual capacity is the same, if they're taking 3 times, if it's taking them 3 to 4 hours to do the homework, and you have another kid that only takes an hour, most of the kids takes an hour, this could be this performance anxious kid. They have a hard time getting started, hard time performing, hard time with it afterwards. We would also want to look at probably OCD at that point if we're seeing a pattern of it taking a long time. But again, the task of performing is creating a lot of anxiety. I'm going to speed through a couple things just to make sure we get to everything.
Ira,
Yes.
Before we move on, there is a couple questions in
Sure.
the chat if you want to take a look at that.
Okay, perfect. Let's see here. So it says, I'll start up here. Oh boy, we have a couple. What is the name of the training? I think we're talking about KPMT training. So it's Kasdan Parent Management Training, and it's from Alan Kasdan out of Yale University. Yale. And then the person who does that locally is Dr. Zabatka at Monmouth University. Oh, could I silence my email rings? I could if I knew how to do that right now. Unfortunately, I'll try. Let me see if I can close my email and if that will work. This is a long one, so I'm going to save the last one. I think, let me see. I'm going to save that last one for the end. I think there's a question about parenting, and we'll definitely work on that towards the end. But it sounds like, we know. You define school. How do I define school refusal? I think when we've, this is a good question. When I define school refusal, I essentially, every time I try to do a case formulation, it's not something that we teach a lot in school anymore. But whenever I'm doing a case formulation, I try to rule out everything. So I'm kind of looking at, is this school phobia? Is this school refusal? Is this school avoidance? I like to make sure that I've ruled out everything else. So I rule out the intelligence, I rule out everything. And if there's no other further explanation or possibility, that's kind of when I get to the idea of school refusal. Because again, once we get to the idea of school refusal, then there's like, we're really talking about family work, motivation, that kind of stuff are going to be key. Controlling secondary gain is going to be key. But the reason why I'm hesitant to go too deep into that is because, like I said, I would say the majority of kids that I see that come to me that are diagnosed, people say this kid's school refusal, they aren't typically school refusal. There is an anxiety-based concern, or there's a testing intelligence concern that's also very frequent, or a very big combination of the two. So a lot of times a kid who's dysgraphic or dyslexic or has a Lexile score much lower than the class and is being asked to perform on a Lexile score that they're not able to keep up with. Not only is that part of it, but then let's say if that's not always addressed appropriately in the first couple of years, especially when reading and stuff becomes so important, then they become phobic to that kind of issue and school-related issue, and they gain that performance anxiety. But to get to school refusal, I tend to try to rule out everything else and make sure that I'm pretty close to positive that it's school refusal before I treat it as such. Mostly because if you don't, it just prolongs the problem. If we don't address the school anxiety, if there's anxiety present and we start doing KPMT or something like that in the house, it can be kind of lost. The anxiety gets lost, and then we're not able to help that kid. It's hard to go back after that. It's way easier to rule out the anxiety and get to the diagnosis of school phobia or school refusal than it is to provide all the interventions that we might do for school refusal when it's actually anxiety. So when we're talking about social school phobia, we're talking about the anxiety of those social situations We'll ask, when does the anxiety begin and what are you typically thinking about? So the anxiety begins on any of the triggers that are in the social forum. So it's a lot different today than it was maybe 10, 15, or 20 years ago. With social media, TV, phones, a lot of the kids have triggers to that social phobic response to school. Anytime there's a group chat about school, anything else, there could be a trigger of that social anxiety. What do you think? The toughest part of these kids' days, probably the toughest part of their day, is going to be that unstructured time. We want to ask questions about this unstructured time. It's the bus rides, it's gym class, it's the cafeteria. And we have to really be diligent when we're talking about, in a little bit, when we're talking about the fear hierarchy. I had a student that I was working with who we did an exposure plan for them to go into the cafeteria, and they were supposed to be sitting in the cafeteria and just allowing conversation to happen. They didn't actually have to go up to anyone, but allowing conversation to happen. And they came to me and they said, Ira, I did my exposure for this week. I sat in the cafeteria. No one talked to me, not one person. I was like, really? That's interesting that no one would talk to you. You have so many friends here at the school. So I said, next week, I'm going to visit you one of the days and I'll make sure that I talk to you and you'll at least have one interaction for your exposure, and then we'll see from there. And I went in and I saw her in the cafeteria, and she had her Monster Beat headphones covered in her ears, over her head with a hood up, and she was kind of watching a screen. And we kind of talked about like how she really wasn't doing the exposure, because there's no way anyone would be brave enough to kind of come up to her and talk to her if she was that isolated, that she was in the room, yes, but she wasn't actually exposing herself to that social situation. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Which class do you have the most friends in? Sometimes that'll make a difference. Who do you sit with in lunch? Again, trying to get to the idea of how these unstructured times are for them. If there's any times that they're not feeling a lot of anxiety. One of the most, and I was talking about this, I presented yesterday at the Somerset County ASAP meeting, actually. And they had a great group of people asking a lot of really good questions too. So, but we were talking about this, and I think, I just lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think one of the things that we can do to kind of evaluate whether someone has school phobia is, this is what we're talking about, sending them back to class. So if you're a school-based counselor or you work in a school and you send the kid back to class, let's say 10 minutes after the bell rang, or they're worried about being late to class all the time, like I can't walk in 2 or 3 minutes late. So maybe they go to class and they then come to your office because they're too anxious to walk in their class. A lot of kids with a school social phobia or a social school phobia are really nervous about that social component of walking into a class late and having a lot of sets of eyes on them. A lot of cognitions about, they're staring at me, I'm going to look foolish, I'm going to trip, I'm going to fall. So that's a really strong indicator that they have a social school phobia. So doing okay on time. We get to the treatment. So what do we do if we finally come to the idea that we have the school phobia? Now we know whether it's performance or social school phobia. We start looking, and obviously the research tells us that the therapeutic relationship is the most important thing. Whether we're using exposures, as we're going to talk about, or CBT or DBT or any other motivational interviewing, when we're working with clients, the relationship is really important. And I think one of the hardest things for people working with kids, especially kids with school phobia, is doing this next thing. Trust what they say is true to them. So many times what happens, and I'm very guilty of this early on too. I've done it probably dozens of times. I still struggle not to do it. But a kid comes to us and we're talking to them, and maybe we go to the home or we give them a call and we say, you coming to school today? And they say, I can't come to school today. And the natural response to all the adults in our life is usually the same. If we're lucky, we'll say maybe why, but most people say, yes, you can do it. I believe in you. They take this very strengths-based approach. And I think it's great to have a strengths-based approach. And I think it's okay to be honest about your opinion and say, like, I think you can, but I don't lead with that. When the kid tells me, I can't make it to school today, I say, well, what can you do today? Let's talk about what you're able to do. Because what they're saying is true to them. They can't make it to school. They're kind of telling us something is standing in their way. They're not able to manage the anxiety. They're not able to manage something about what's going on. So I typically take the stance of empathizing with the truth that this is their truth. They can't come to school today. But then I'll partner with them and join with them and ask them, this is what, social work 101 always says, join them where they're at. So in telling them, yes, you can, we're not joining them where they're at. We're asking them to come where we want them to be. And joining them where we're at, we said, well, what can you do today? And this is a really good spot to join with the kid and start on the fear hierarchy. We're really able to kind of connect with them. So I've had some kids that they're like, well, I could join, I've even started with kids, I can join a Zoom, but I can't show my face. Okay, and that's the first step, right? If that's the first step, that's the first step I'm going to take. I hope we don't stay there long with most kids, but if that's the first step we have to do, then that's the first step we'll take. I think it's also really, I want to go back to that real quick. Kids intuitively know certain things. And I give the example oftentimes. Imagine we were all sitting again in a room and I came to each one of you and I said, hey, listen, we're all going to work at running a 5-minute mile today, right? I want everyone to run a 5-minute mile. Well, most of you would recognize by looking at me that I'm probably not the one to make the 5-minute mile. But it would be really frustrating if you said, listen, Ira, I can't run the 5-minute mile. I'm not able to do it. And I said, well, yes, you can. Let's go. Let's do it. Right. And I just said, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And you were saying like, no, I've never run under a 12-minute mile. I'm not able to do it. And we said, yes, you can. Even if I said, hey, I'll buy you, most of us, right? If I said, I'll buy you dinner tonight, or I'll buy you a new car even, most of us still aren't going to be able to make that 5-minute mile because we know that about ourselves, that we're not able to do that. We might try and we might be able to say, I can run a 5-minute mile 2 months from now, but I'm going to need you to help me with training and diet and exercise and all that kind of stuff. So again, kind of joining someone where they're at, I just use that as an example because if someone asked me to run a 5-minute mile today, I would know I couldn't do it. I may want to do it really bad. I might need help doing it, and I may have some future plans of trying to do it, but all the confidence building in the world is not going to help me on that day. So what do we do? So the psychoeducation skills training is really going to be kind of the main purpose, the main topic of what we're doing. In some instances, the idea of skills training is really important. And in traditional exposure response prevention, we don't typically do a lot of skills training. But in my experience, I think having skills and training about anxiety and the physiological responses is really important for kids. So we're going to talk about things, how and why do we get anxious? It's interesting that many of you are probably in the helping profession, but there's a lot of people that don't understand their own anxiety. And that's adults, not just the kids that we're working with, but many adults. If we go to a grocery store and start talking to people, or if you have children, you go to their baseball practice or soccer practice and you're talking to people, they really don't understand why we get anxious and what it means. And the physiological response to anxiety, this is probably one of the most important things that we'll talk about with kids about their anxiety. Again, them understanding what that limbic response looks like, them understanding that their heart rate is going up and what to do about it. But I will throw another kind of caution to the wind here. One of the mistakes that I made, and I see being made a lot still, is we have someone, maybe even at school or before school, they come to us, they're anxious, they're panicked, right? And they come and they ask for help. And one of the things that we do, hopefully we're not telling them, we kind of talked about, when I asked this question yesterday, I said, well, what do we say to someone who's in this anxious response when they're coming to us with a panic attack? Hopefully we're not saying calm down. Hopefully there's no one that's doing that, although we probably all still do that from time to time. We say, calm down, calm down. But that's certainly not going to be super fruitful. But many of us have this really positive idea that we say, hey, take a deep breath. And this is a very well-intentioned thing that we're asking them to do. And it's actually one of the most important things we could ask people to do. But the timing on that is really not the best timing. When someone comes to us already in a limbic response, right? Their prefrontal cortex has shut down, their rational cognitive brain is done, their amygdala is taken over, and they're in panic mode, right? This is not the time to teach a new skill. We're going to have a hard time teaching a new skill. And one of the things that I've tried to do, and I've seen a lot of people do, is teach that new skill in that moment. And what I do now, I've changed my process up. I changed my process because what I do now is I ride out that panic attack. I be there, I'm present, I'm supportive, I try to be helpful, but ultimately I ride out that panic attack. And what I typically do then is use, after the panic attack, after the limbic response is down, I use that as a time to use some motivational interviewing and say, hey, you seemed really uncomfortable. I think there's something that I could do that I think would help. Here's what I think we can do. And then I'll teach them and talk to them about the practice of providing good breathing techniques. And I'll ask them to practice that, not just during a panic attack or the limbic response, but when every day, so that when they do need it during that panic attack, or they do need it when they're very anxious before school, it's there and it's present. Let's see, did I miss a question? I think I saw someone's hand up. Okay, so nothing yet that, so I think educating people about the physiological response, educating them about deep breathing is fantastic, but we want to be really careful about our timing. Unfortunately, if we time that wrong, what happens is we teach them this during the limbic response. It doesn't work for them because it's very uncomfortable, and then they throw that coping skill out. And especially now when I'm working in partial care, I see a lot of kids come in saying like, deep breathing doesn't work for me. It's crap. It doesn't work. Even adults telling me deep breathing doesn't work. And generally speaking, it's because not because deep breathing doesn't actually work, but because we're employing it wrong. And sometimes we're even teaching it wrong. Again, the reason why we go into fight or flight might be really important for kids to understand that. A lot of kids especially think that when they go into this fight or flight mode, that there's something wrong with them. And I like to just remind them that this is natural, and the idea of going in the fight or flight mode is something that happens to everyone. It's just we have to kind of reformulate when it's happening to you. Psychoeducation on cognitive behavioral therapy is really important. I've got 1 or 2 minutes left. I might go like 1 or 2 minutes over. Emotions are not facts are important. So we're going to get into the building of a fear hierarchy, which I think is probably one of the most important things, most important part of the practice. But building a fear hierarchy from least scary scenario to the most scary scenario. So this is probably the meats and potatoes of what we're going to do with a school phobic kid. And we can adjust this. Ideally, it would be very individualized. So we would have individualized fear hierarchies for each kid that we're working with. And it would be a negotiation, again, starting from that, well, what can you do today, up to what is going to be the most scariest thing for you. I have had some success with kids, and the staff that I work with have had some success with kids adjusting for performance or social anxiety. So if it's performance-based, we can kind of have this implied fear hierarchy where we introduce certain things based on those fears of most performance-based kids, and the same with the social. So what do we expose for? So we're going to expose for all different kinds of things. I listed a few of the most prominent things that we'll need to expose for. Place is the first one, but typically speaking, when we're doing exposures, it's not enough to just say school is the place that we're exposing for. It's usually, we have to think of school broken down into very small pieces. So it might be the counselor's office might be a place. The group room might be, in guidance might be a place. The assistant principal's office might be a place. A classroom for period 1 might be a place. And we're going to kind of expose for what seems least scary to most scary. So when I was consulting with districts, I would often go in before the school year started, and I would start day 1. I would have that kid come in, meet with me in my office. And then day 2 or 3, and maybe even 4, meet with a small group of kids and myself in another group room, right? So we're exposing for place. We're also simultaneously exposing for people. So they were exposed to me first day, and then the next day they might be exposed to another group leader or a couple of kids in that group room. So again, exposing for people in groups, we're just exposing for different situations of people. So starting from least scary to most scary, that often starts with one clinical person maybe, or one favorite staff person, if they really are attached to their principal or guidance counselor or CST worker, whoever it is that's got a great relationship. That might be the first person exposure. And we work all the way up to, let's say, either being in a busy classroom, being in a cafeteria, or maybe even being, in front of a group at an assembly or something like that. Might be the top of the fear hierarchy for that particular student. Also, and again, we can kind of take our time depending on the needs of the school. And I know every school has different needs. I will tell you that I've worked with kids, just to give you like a timeline. Most exposure plans can be over about 1 to 2 weeks. We don't want to stretch them out too long. Some people who have had really strong school phobic responses will take a longer period of time. But I've worked with kids pre-pandemic that weren't in school for 2 to 3 years, and we did 2 weeks of exposures, and we were able to get them present in class. And then once they're present in class, again, we might start doing academic stressors like lectures, tests, and projects. So that's when we start reintroducing academic work, especially for that performance anxious kid. That might be a whole nother level of kind of anxiety that they're going to have to be able to kind of confront. So maybe the first couple of days at the school, we're exposing for people in place, and then we start exposing for those other tests and projects, and any kind of do nows, classwork, anything else that might be somewhere on the hierarchy. And we may have to help that kid figure that out. Hey, are do nows high, or are they low on the hierarchy? Is it only academic stuff that people are going to look at, or is it stuff that people aren't going to look at or are going to look at? So that we have to kind of feel it out with the student as far as how do we build that fear hierarchy up. In terms of time and endurance, just because a kid comes to school and is successful for an hour doesn't necessarily mean that they can be successful for 7 hours or 8 hours. So we want to build up exposure for time. This is really important to understand. And that doesn't necessarily mean they only come to school for an hour, but maybe if you're exposing for tests or lectures, we'll only test or lecture them for an hour to 90 minutes. Now, as we move up the exposure plan, if a student has high anxiety through an exposure and that exposure lasts more than 90 minutes, we would typically go down the rung. So for example, if we were exposing for time, and this isn't an example, this isn't like a real world scenario, I think you have to think a little bit more less concrete than this, but let's say today we're going to expose for period 1, tomorrow period 2, the next day period 3, right? So they come in today, they do well with just period 1. They come in tomorrow, they do well with period 1 and 2. The following day with period 3, they do 1, 2, and 3, and they get to the end of that period, they're still panicked. It's 90 minutes later, they're still panicked. They've never felt a reduction. We don't just stop and say, oh, we failed. We just say, hey, we're just going to go back to level 2 again. We're going to go back down the rung. So now tomorrow we'll do 1 and 2 and make sure that exposure worked well. And we may do that for a couple days, 2 days, 3 days, and then go back up the fear hierarchy before we move on. When we're addressing kind of other school specific things like school stress, bells, lockers, bus rides, and even sitting, I put sitting on there because I think if you're working with a kid who happens to have school phobia and ADHD, just asking them to sit in a chair for 20, 30, 40 minutes might be really difficult for them. That might be an exposure that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of classroom anxiety. So something simple like sitting in a chair might be a really good exposure. So generally speaking, what we're going to do with the exposure plan is we're going to meet with the student, and their family if we want. If they want their family included, we're going to build the fear hierarchy. The fear hierarchy could be 6 things, 10 things. We don't want to go too high. We don't want to have like 100 different exposures. Generally speaking, in my experience, if they have a 1, 2, and 3 exposure, as they gain confidence in their first or second exposure, they generalize to other like exposures. So if we're exposing for place for 1 classroom and they go into 1 classroom, they're successful, and we go to move up the fear hierarchy, then it kind of generalizes to other classrooms as well. Not always, but most of the time, if they're good in first period, they might be good in second, third, or fourth period. And then I think just to end it off, if you have kids that still struggle with that, and or if you have kids who have OCD or dealing with OCD, or they have what I generally call treatment-resistant anxiety, meaning they have had a really hard time with using skills of any kind, I would always recommend kind of looking at ERP and exposure response prevention as a possibility for treatment. Again, at GenPsych, our 2 locations where we do school phobia work is at Marlborough and at Rochdale Park, probably hopefully to expand, but we do have all staff is trained on ERP. They have ongoing supervision in ERP, and we're extremely excited to help those kids. So I think, Henry, is it okay? I'm going to just kind of reread through the chat. If you guys have questions, I will stay on as long as you have questions. Hopefully that you found some of this information helpful, but I'll stay on and answer some of these questions for us.
Yeah, you can go for it. You can answer the questions.
Okay, cool. I think I did get my email to silence, which was good. I'm just going to read one of these. We have a student with 43 days absent. I believe she's attached to her mom and is afraid to leave her side. Both mom and grandma have had some serious health issues. Parents is not following through on counseling. The next step for administration is to take them to court. The child needs treatment and will not be able to come to school without. So forcing the child to come to school by the courts is not helping the child. I don't know if the parent's insurance will cover the cost of treatment. What is the responsibility of the school? For this particular kid, I would say, I'm not sure if they'll cover treatment, but you can give me a call. We do sometimes with some really kids who are struggling, we'll kind of scholarship certain kids in certain programs. I think getting them into treatment of any kind. So I think starting them with a therapist that knows exposures, like if they can get an in-home therapist through Perform Care as a free way for them to get the treatment that they might need. But definitely reach out to me and we could have like a little one-on-one conversation. I know, families seem like they can be a barrier to treatment sometimes. Sometimes once we win them over and we kind of have that conversation, they could be really quite the strong asset at times as well. But definitely contact. I'm not sure I wouldn't answer what the school's responsibility would be. I think that all depends on your administration, what school you're at, what district you're at, what resources are available. But if you wanted to, definitely contact me, let me know. We can see if we can hook that person up with some help. I need to excellent. Okay, sorry. I don't think I answered them quick enough because they went to lunch duty, but hopefully I can contact the person afterwards. First choice safe person for a child. Should you direct the child to a second choice person to get them to class, or wait until the first choice person is available? Oh, that's a good question. When you're unable to be the first choice safe person for a child, should you direct the child to the second choice person to get in the class, or wait until the first choice person is available? I think if the student, and it's hard to tell because I don't know the age of the student, but you can have a team of people that are involved. That's why it's really important to have a lot of people knowing exactly what's going on with that student and what's going on with their fear hierarchy. But I will tell you, with kids as young as 8, 7, 8, 9 years old, if they're invested in working through the fear hierarchy with you, they just need prompts on what to do next. So I don't know if walking to the next class would be ideal, depending on how long that exposure was. If obviously it was over 90 minutes, then we probably want to, wait for that primary person to help them through the exposure. But I think, the more people you have that are trained, even if the teachers or teachers assistants or anybody in the class can be trained on that fear hierarchy and know what they're working on, if they can give that prompt like, hey, you're still working on your exposure, like, let's see if we can make it another 8 minutes, something along those lines, and see what happens. But no, I don't think you necessarily have to have one primary person in charge of all that. That would be pretty overwhelming, especially if you had multiple kids who were struggling with the same situation. Is the program at GenPsych a program offered during the day, or is there after school PHP program as well? We do have both. The programming in Marlborough right now is during the day. We will probably open, it's brand new. We will probably open in the next few months an evening IOP program, but it is partial care right now during the day. And it's set up like that, kind of when they're doing the exposures at school. What we hope to do is get to the point where we can transition them to either like 1 or 2 days back to school very quickly and start doing those exposures at school, and then really only need us hopefully in the evening time. So we do plan on starting that programming in the evening. Okay, are GenPsych ERP services being offered in person? Do you emphasize the systemic approach, inclusion of school and home support? Yes, so they are in person right now. I think being as integrative with the schools, with home, with everything as possible is probably the best route. I think GenPsych as a whole is really working at that. It's one of our goals for the next year that we've identified, and making sure that when we are seeing a kid who's got school phobia, we're hoping to get a fear hierarchy back to you guys when they're done with partial care with us, so that you can kind of take the work that we've done and transition that to the school. But definitely it's always imperative really for people, especially with exposure treatment, when you're working with OCD and with school phobia, it's really hard to not do that comprehensively with a family. So the family does need to be on board. We don't want them providing reassurance, like you don't have to go today at the wrong time. So family contact is really important. It can be done, if you can get the kid in the school, it can be done without a lot of support, but ideally the school, the family, the staff, everybody would be on the same page in an ideal situation. Is transportation provided? Yes, it is provided in all of our areas. As you may know, there's like a hiring shortage right now. That's really a struggle. So we do have transportation. It is limited, but we are working really hard to get more drivers in. If you guys know of anybody, if you're school personnel and you have any retired family people that are teachers and stuff, DCF requires that our drivers have 5 years experience working with kids, which is often a barrier for drivers for us. We get lots of people that want to drive, but not a lot of people that have that experience to help with the kids. So please, if you know someone, that would be one of the best contacts I can make from this webinar, is if you find someone, because I'm excited to share this stuff with you. I'm excited for you to use it, but I'm also excited to get people to treatment that really need it. I think somebody put families are often one of the most difficult barriers to treatment. And I think this can be true. When I was school-based, I would tell all my clinicians, and I don't want you guys to take this the wrong way, because I think, and I still tell my staff at the PHP this, but I often tell them, try everything. Try everything first. Before we tell the parents that they're the focus of our concern, I try everything else. And what I find is that once I've exhausted everything else, and then I bring evidence-based practice to parents, I can usually get them on board. And I'm kind of a persuasive talker most of the time, but most of the time we can get them on board. If not, I just take that advocate role very, very seriously. Keep advocating, keep advocating. And it does bring me to the idea of, we do have a program that's brand new to GenPsych. It's a STAR program, and it provides services to schools. So GenPsych coming to your school and providing either professional development or a clinician there, or just consultation. And the reason I bring that up to that question is, oftentimes as a consultant, I don't do as much consulting anymore, but as a consultant, I've gone in and I've talked to families. And when people that are involved in the treatment are telling a family, hey, this is what this person needs, sometimes they're a little bit resistant, but when they have a third party come in and say, hey, you might want to look at this, sometimes it breaks down that family barrier a little bit. So if you ever need that, please give me a call. And I think maybe we can try and set something up. Yes, please. Is transportation okay? Let me see. There was another spot, I think, where the Q&A is, right? Where we can. What are you saying or not disagree? Oh, wait, hold on. Along with the video games, what roles do the screens and social media play? A huge role. Social media, I think the screens, everything. I think I was just talking to Henry about this yesterday, actually, after the ASAP meeting, but I think they do play a huge role. It's hard to get away from anxiety provoking things. It's hard to let our limbic system relax when there's a constant stimulus. So if I would always be advocating for kind of like screen-free time in a house. I have 2 boys myself, and we have a lot of screen-free time at the house. A lot of time where we're just doing physical stuff like playing ball, playing board games, things like that. A lot of times kids need that interaction. Older kids, a little bit harder to get them to do that, and let the media go. But I think it does play a big role. I think late in the night, then we could take behavioral things like we can ask parents to kind of shut things off. I will tell you though, as coming from a KPMT standpoint, we would often make a lot of praise and prompts around not using, going to bed on time, doing things like that. But I have told parents to like shut off the Wi-Fi at times. But most of the time, that's like a last ditch effort. 90 to 95% of the time, if I'm helping the kid with their anxiety, there's a natural weaning process to video games. And then once I've helped them in a couple situations reduce their anxiety, and I try to connect the dots on how the computer screen usage, social media, group chats and stuff are affecting their anxiety, I'm not saying I win them all, but like if I can go 50-50 with that one, I'm pretty happy with it. What are you saying or not saying or doing as you ride out the panic attacks through with the child? I'll be honest with you, whatever I can. I just don't teach any skills. Sometimes I'll just say like, hey, I'm here if you want to talk. It sounds like, especially if a kid's good at expressing themselves and they say like, I need space. I'm the first person. It's so funny because a lot of times a 16-year-old will come up angry, fight or flight mode, and they'd be like, F you, leave me alone. I just need to be alone. And I know safety reasons, maybe we have to keep them in sight or something like that. And I'll actually say it to them like, hey, you know what? I'm just worried about your safety, but I'm respecting you. I'm going to come sit over here. If you need anything, let me know. I'll go needs-based most of the time. What do you need? Is there anything that I can give you that will help? Sometimes they'll be like, can you get me a glass of water? If so, I'll do it. whatever it is that I can meet their needs. But if not, I just really ride it out. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable as a social worker, as a therapist, as a counselor. It's uncomfortable to sit with someone who's in discomfort or pain, and I'm not particularly helping. But I know that trying to help them in that moment is probably going to get shut down or not as helpful. And that's why, honestly, I will say that the first time I'm meeting with people, I will go into like a skills training real quick. I'll try and get them that one skill in case I do see them again. Because if you have done skills training with them in the prior, it's okay for you to kind of introduce a skill if you've done that with them before and you feel like they practiced. It's just only when they come that first time, I wouldn't introduce that too much. How to get the parents more involved if a student is cutting classes to avoid a sense of social anxiety. Parents aware, but states the child is also soft-spoken at home, speaks more words. Parents seem open to mental health services for the child. I would refer them to treatment. I would refer them to a parent group. I would refer them to, I know parents don't love this, but I often will refer them to their own therapy, to help support their kid. They could join a CAS and parent management group and learn how to kind of praise and prompt what's going on. So that is definitely something I would do. I would have maybe a family session, try to increase motivation for the whole family at one point if the kid's on board for that. I think one of the things that you could do with a school phobic kid is make sure that your partnership is strong and that you're always transparent about your case management efforts with the family and friends and stuff like that. Because the last thing you want to do is be like, oh, I spoke to your parents when they didn't know that. So try and get everybody on board in the same way if you can. Henry, are we okay still answering questions?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
fine. I was noticing that people were leaving, so let me say my spiel and then we get to keep talking.
Perfect. Go for it. Yeah.
I did want to thank everyone that came out today. I want to thank Ira as well. This was definitely a really great presentation. I did just put in the chat the link to where the video will be uploaded next week. It's a busy week, Christmas right around the corner, so everything's starting to slow down. So it should be available next week. Along with that, on Monday, we will be sending out their certificates and any of the resources that were touched upon during this presentation. And again, if you guys can just fill out the survey that will pop up when you close out of Zoom, that would be a super great help. I'll also include the link in the email as well, if you guys can't access the link here in the chat. But Ira, if you want to continue answering questions, we can do that for the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
Call it a day. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a couple left that I didn't get to. So have a child who won't go to school because they're bullied that goes after them. He also saw his bully beat up another child badly. Administration said, so anytime, I talked about this yesterday, actually, this is so great that people are open and talking about things. Anytime that I've had a disagreement with anybody that I work with, where I see something that they don't, I very much take on, there's a book out there called Extreme Ownership. It's written actually by an ex-Navy SEAL, which is something kind of that I stumbled upon as a social worker. But my goal always in advocating is I assume if the staff that work for me, if they're not doing what I feel is the appropriate thing to do or what we need to do, I kind of assume responsibility and say, hey, I haven't taught them enough about what they need to do. I haven't been transparent enough about what I need. And also when I'm dealing with administration that's above me, I constantly kind of go through this. I reevaluate what I'm saying and I say to myself, if there's only two things, if they're not doing what I think is the right thing to do, there's only two options. A, I'm wrong, which I'd like to think I'm not wrong, but sometimes that's true. Or B, I haven't explained enough and given enough information to them that they can come to the same conclusion as me. So if they're saying they haven't seen it, I'll have to kind of bring in more evidence to show them as much as possible that something's happening. But in terms of treatment with the kid, the exposures would be the same. Yeah, I think we would have a lot of the same things going on. And we might problem solve around times if they're concerned about that bullying behavior. So we might kind of, and we may or may not do a HIB based on your school policy and exactly what you think is going on. Presentation, very helpful. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you. Just making sure I see any, if I see any question marks, I'm stopping and asking everyone. I got someone from Gloucester County. I'm not really familiar. Henry, are you familiar with Gloucester? Where it's located? I'm not. But what I would say is if you, at any point, if you guys have a referral, if you call GenPsych, if we don't have a close enough location, we actually have like a discharge planner and some case management entities in our access center. If you call and we can't help them, they'll give you a call back, and they'll give you a place nearby that you can get help. I know that every school district is different, but when should we start screening students for refusal, avoidance, and then phobia? Is it after a certain number of absences? I would say the sooner the better. If you can kind of, 5, 6 absences, I would start talking to kids. If you have a kid on your caseload, if we have suspicion that it is school phobia or school avoidance, I would start as soon as possible on, and then I would say it's never too late. So even if a kid has 70 days out, it's never too late to try and do exposure work, because that following year, you might save them from missing just 5 or 10 days. And then I think that's most of the question marks.
There might have been 1 or 2 back in the chat as well.
Okay, let me take a look.
I
Do you have
think
support groups or parents integrated in the treatment plan? We don't currently, but we are going to do that. We are also planning. So we're planning a lot more web-based stuff in the next couple months. Next month we'll be having a program on level of care, and when they're referred to level care, I hope a lot of parents do come to that, because I think a lot of parents are confused too about when should they bring their kid to the hospital, when should they look at partial care, when should they look at in-home therapy. So I think next month we'll have a webinar on that to kind of help parents out. But I think that's a great topic. I'll put it on my agenda for sure. But I do think that once our ERP programs are a little bit more established in both Rochelle Park and in Marlborough, that'll probably be coming in January in the new year. Kazan's free training on the website that I'm about to check out. Cool. I didn't realize that. I paid a lot of money for it. I don't see anything else. And Henry, did I miss anything that you're seeing?
I think we covered all the questions that were asked. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. And again, if you guys have any questions that I didn't ask, feel free to shoot me an email. I usually respond within the day, so definitely shoot me an email. And thank you guys so much for expressing interest in coming. I was very excited to meet with you all.
All right. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. I'm going to close out the webinar now, so that you guys can all fill out the survey, I hope. But thank you, Ira. I do appreciate this.
Thanks, Henry. I appreciate you. Thanks so much.
All right, everyone, have a nice day.